Hello, David Clarke here from DVC Training. This is just going to be a short video about the recent update for EDIUS, which is 11.11.14613. So it's another just small update to EDIUS 11.11. First thing you'll notice is that when you start EDIUS, you now get a progress bar that you can see. In previous versions, that little purple thing was a lot darker, so it was there, but depending on the settings of your monitor, you couldn't quite see it. Now you can see it. Next thing you get is they have spruced up the bin a bit. In particular, I've noticed that when I do things like grab a whole folder of stuff and dump it into the bin, it comes in quite a bit quicker than it used to. Still, when you do things like change between different views, it still takes a little bit of time to update, but it's getting better. But the most useful thing added is probably the ability to do things like change some of the properties like real name, frame rate, field order, and aspect ratio on lots of clips at once, particularly real name. So for example, if you're doing a multi-camera shoot and you've got lots of different shots from the same camera, like here, these are all from a tape which is called D147. So there's lots of different versions of that. Well, if they are given a tape name, when it multi-cameras them up, they will go on the same line as opposed to spreading it out all over the place. In previous versions, you used to be able to just select a whole bunch of stuff like this and then click in the real name and it would update lots of them. That's something EDIUS 11 doesn't do anymore. But what they have done is if you just press F2, it'll open up the properties window and you can come down to the real name here and you can type in the actual tape name, click. Now they've all got it at once. Or I could change the frame rate. I get this quite a bit when I'm bringing in animations, for example. I'm doing a project which is at 50 frames a second, but I'm rendering out the CGI stuff at 25. So for example, let me just bring in an image sequence of something that I've rendered out. So as always with an image sequence, you click on the first one, click sequence clip and go open, and it brings the stuff in as an image sequence. If I was then to convert that, now what I generally do is I'll right click convert and then give it a name and save it somewhere. And then EDIUS will go off and make another version of that for me. But you'll notice when it converted that image sequence, which said it was 25 to 50, and I wanted it to be 25. And bring in several variations. So now I've brought in two other image sequences just to use them. I'm going to right click, convert, file batch. I use grass value with alpha because these are ones which I am superimposing onto video, and it'll go ahead and convert those. You just have to wait for it to do it. Yep, done. Nice and quick. It's made those image sequences at 50 frames a second to match the project. So if I put them on the timeline, they'll be running too fast. But what I'm going to do is just select all of those and then pop over to here. Like I said, I could press F2 or I could just unclick that, choose this and put it down to 25. Now they're running at the right speed. I get those sort of things all the time, particularly if I'm bringing in something from another project. Sometimes if I make a grass valley file inside of Resolve and then I bring it into EDIUS, it seems to think it's interlaced when in fact it's progressive. But if there's loads of them, you'd have to have gone into the properties one at a time and changed it. Now I could lasso the lot, press F2, come in here and change the field order to whatever should be correct, or the aspect ratio, or whatever it is. But it's just nice. Those were things I did change en masse on several occasions in older versions. It's nice we can now do that inside of EDIUS 11. The other thing they have brought in is the ability to import and export bins. Let me take this as an example. I'm going to pop some clips onto the timeline. You don't have to worry about what they are really. But I've got some clips on the timeline. I'm going to stick the sequence inside that bin. And for good measure, I'm going to put a sub bin under it and put a bunch of clips into that. In my case, it's all the clips that belong to tape 150. I'm just going to grab and shove into there. So you see, I've got a bin there with a sub bin and a sequence inside of it. Again, older versions, you could right click and say export and it would export the bin. That has not been there in EDIUS 11 up until this version. So let's see what happens if I export that bin, and now I can make up a new project. Right click and say import, find that bin, bring it in. And there you can see it's brought that in. You can also, rather than bringing a bin, bring in a whole project this way. So if you click on import and find a project and then click open, it'll bring in that project and the sequences that go with it. So for example, that's the entire project. And in here, I do have some sequences. Now you notice my sequences have got the wrong kind of icon up there. This is something that occasionally happens or has happened with me. If I try and open that up, it doesn't work as a sequence, even though it is a sequence. So what I've actually got to do afterwards is to shut down EDIUS and then open it up again. You might also see this message pop up, which does come up from time to time. This is to do with it synchronizing databases. Effectively, all you do with this is go OK and save the project again. So in many ways, I just wish that thing didn't pop up anyway. But now I've restarted EDIUS, I can actually see the sequences. It happens that all the stuff in these sequences on this project are offline, but basically it has brought in the sequences and all the bins and clips from the other projects. I had previously been either going to Mink and doing it that way, or I can do File and then Import Sequence to bring in sequences but not bins. This, again, something that was nice, that was in EDIUS 9 and 10 and so on, and is now back in EDIUS 11. And this whole thing about the sequences not being seen properly and having to restart EDIUS is obviously something they will look at. Doesn't happen every time. Sometimes you can just open it up and press F5 and it sorts it out, but a restart of EDIUS will sort that out. Also, if you import and export bins, it won't bring in the sequences that are in the bin. It only brings in the clips. Whereas if you import a project, it will bring in the sequences as well. Should also point out that sometimes it doesn't work because if your original project settings don't match the one that you're bringing the stuff into, it will probably pop up an error message and you won't be able to do it. In which case you'd probably have to go the Mink route and dig up the projects in that. I talked about that in a previous video. But yeah, nice little thing to be added back in. The other thing they have done is added support for a red format called Red VRaptor. Don't have any of that, and I can't afford a red camera. But if you've got one, that's going to be jolly useful. You can also do the same thing inside of Mink. So let me close that down and start up Mink. You go to Management, and if you've got clips in the library here, I can turn on the real name, turn on frame rate, and in here, obviously this thing's 25 frames a second. And yeah, I can select these clips here, unclick the properties panel, and I can change the frame rate, or I can add a real name on, or I can change the progressive. The same kind of stuff that I could do inside of EDIUS. To be honest, 99% of the time I'll do it inside of EDIUS rather than the Mink, because I'm in Edit, I need to change it right there and then. There's also a bunch of bug fixes. You can see the whole list on the Grass Valley website, which I'll link to in the description. And you should be being prompted to download it straight away by EDIUS. The other thing to point out is, as it says here, you must have an updated version, at least version 3.1.00 of Viz Title. And if you go to the EDIUS download page, then you will have a link in there to get the 3.1 update of Viz Title Express. There is a 3.2 update, which you can get by going to Viz Title itself. So here, if you go to Support and Viz Title, Downloads, you can see here they have a 3.21 installer, but to download it, you need to have logged in, which means you need to have created an account and registered your serial number with them. But you'll just need to do this bit so you can get hold of that later version. If you don't, it's not the end of the world, but it has just got a nice little bug fix in it, which does fix something, which sometimes causes EDIUS to be a bit slow on starting up. Other thing worth mentioning here is I have been updating my EDIUS tutorial for EDIUS 11. You might notice if you got my EDIUS tutorial originally that it's a slightly different interface. I think it's a bit simpler and also does nice things like, for example, when you go to a particular chapter, it just starts playing it straight away. But the format is the same. It's divided up into the same sections. And all I've done is gone through and modified things to do with EDIUS 11. I haven't redone the whole thing. So in some parts of the tutorial, you'll still see the EDIUS 10 bin as opposed to the EDIUS 11 bin. But what I did do is to remake the whole bin section. So it's specifically about EDIUS 11. And in the other sections where it's not remade, it doesn't really have a bearing on what's going on, because pretty much everything else was the same. And then I did include things to do with making subtitles up. So there's a whole section on subtitles. I put in something to do with using Acorn, bit of an introduction to Viz Title, and I streamlined all the printing to files. So print to file is only talking about things that come up in EDIUS 11 as opposed to what was in EDIUS 9 and 10, which is in the old tutorial. If you did buy the tutorial in the last year, I'll give you a free update to the current one. Obviously, if you're going to upgrade to EDIUS, you can quite happily buy the new version off of my website, and there is a discount if you've already got my tutorial. But that's available now as well. Anyway, I hope you found that information useful. Please contact me if you've got any questions. It's david@dvctraining.co.uk. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.